This is the Clean Energy Show with Brian Stockton and James Whittingham.
Hello and welcome to episode 51 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. Welcome to an entertaining discussion of the week's developments in clean energy and transportation. Brian, you and I get together every week. We talk about what's going on in the world, and it is a fast-changing world. We talk about EVs, solar, batteries, wind, all the things that are helping fix the problems we have in the world, and it's always exciting.
Yeah, so much happens every week, and we've been doing this for a full year now, so congratulations to us.
This is our 1-year anniversary special. I cannot believe it. 1 year ago, this is what we sounded like.
Welcome to the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham.
So let's look at the news here. So James, Nissan has come up with a zero emissions lullaby.
Terrible. We were in your bomb shelter. Very rusty.
We were so young back then.
So young, so innocent. I think that's the big thing. We had no idea what was coming. Alexa, how old is the Clean Energy Show?
The Clean Energy Show is 1 year old. It is hosted by James Whittingham and Brian Stockton. Brian Stockton is an award-winning filmmaker. Brian Stockton is also known for vehicular manslaughter in 1987, for which he was never prosecuted and lives with to this day.
Wow. Someone's got to update their Wikipedia page.
Yikes, I got to get on that.
Well, good to know. Thank you, Alexa. Anyway, we've got a lot going on here because we've got extreme cold weather. I want to remind everyone the first part of our show is actually on YouTube this week, which we're happy to do. And we're going to talk about extreme cold weather because where we live in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada, it has been minus 37 Celsius, which is close to minus 37 Fahrenheit for those of you keeping track in the States. It is very cold. And some places where we are, in Saskatoon, for example, is minus 40. And we've got stories from people all over Saskatchewan. There's a lot more EVs this year than there were last year, probably doubled or more. And people have had some problems. How about you, Brian? How's it going for you?
No problem. Just using more power than normal. You know, you spend more time kind of, warming up the car before you go anyplace. It works great. To Tesla Model 3 Standard Range Plus. And preheating the car. I just keep it plugged in as much as possible. The more you can keep it plugged in, keep the battery full and, warm it up off the house current every time you go somewhere. It works great.
Yeah, and I'm loving my car too. And I've had to drive both cars. We have a internal combustion engine Toyota Prius, and it's a high-tech car with some electrical components in the drivetrain, and I just love going to the electric car. In fact, I drove it around last night just for the hell of it, because I just enjoy it so much. I have a 2013 Nissan Leaf that I bought used about 3 years ago, and it's 8 years old now. It was made in January in Tennessee. It's an American car. The thermometer on the gauge on the dash doesn't go below minus 30. Because apparently it doesn't go below minus 30 in the States. Well, it does here, and it works great. And I'm just thrilled with it. I did a test, and every time I post on Twitter, Brian, people are amazed. They're amazed. I post something about my solar panels working just as fine in minus 40 as they do, because they do work better in minus 40 than plus 25, because they lose efficiency at that temperature, and even probably in the plus teens Celsius, because it gets warm on the roof, and it gets 25, more than 25, they start to lose efficiency. So I'm really happy about that. And when I post about electric cars working, I get a lot of traction. I mean, I've had things that have gotten thousands and thousands. Most people ignore my tweets. I hate you for that, but I've gotten thousands and thousands of impressions on these tweets. And I remember when I did a video, which is up on our YouTube channel, about starting an electric car in minus 40. And I went up there, it's got a lot of views too. But one guy, there's always a jackass, one guy said, well, what if it wasn't plugged in? And so I was going to do a comparison between my SUV, which is old, but it's parked in the winter. And I use it for towing in the summer. And what I was going to do is try starting that without plugging it in. But I decided not to. Why? Because I think I would actually damage it. I honestly think that I would damage it. Because you're cold cranking, the cylinders have to go through cold oil. The gas has to be injected into a frozen carburetor and fuel injectors and filters. And I do not want to damage my car.
Yeah, we have a gas-powered Kia Soul, which was sitting for at least a couple of days, not plugged in and very cold, these extreme temperatures. And we've got a remote start for it, which is nice. So I clicked it the other day and started it. It was sitting on the street in front of me so I could look at it from our front window. And the smoke coming out of the tailpipe was more black than normal, like it was not that proper. So it's not good for those cars to be.
Ouch.
Especially when they haven't been plugged in.
Yes. Now, sometimes my Prius starts when it's not plugged in because it uses a traction battery to turn over the crankcase, and but it makes horrible sounds when it hasn't been plugged in, but it is very reliable in starting when it accidentally has been plugged in. So what I did, Brian, and go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that on the very coldest night, I got a call from my mother in the morning, and her furnace wasn't working.
Oh, really?
So it seems that, when it hits minus 40, these gas cars have a hard time starting, and furnaces have a hard time starting. It's kind of like, I think if you got a problem with your car or with your furnace, that's when it's going to kind of show itself when it gets all the way down to minus 40. So she called the furnace repair place right away, and they said, "Oh, we're backed up. We may not get to you today because we've had lots of these kind of calls." So, even home furnaces can be susceptible to these kind of sub-zero problems.
Not want to lose
she has a rumpus room in the house, which is got electric baseboard heaters, so she still had some heat in the house because it's sort of like an electric backup system.
Well, that's frightening. I mean, I fear power outages and in this sort of weather. We had one for 11 hours. We were talking about a few weeks ago, and it was warm. It was zero-ish, but now it would be deadly. It was just, the pipes would freeze. You would have major problems. I think it's because the furnaces are running so much. And I'm just going to say again that I live in a passive solar house, and even in minus 40, the furnace does not come on during the daytime when the sun is shining through. And I would imagine a well-designed passive solar house, a modern one, would be a lot better performing than mine, which is built in 1979 and has some weaknesses in its design, one of which is the insulation in the attic, I might say. So what I did is I put my car on the road the other day and unplugged it. So it was minus 35, and I put my Nissan Leaf on the road, and I left it for 6 hours, and it lost 15% of its battery. So you might say, well, the car, what's it doing? A lot of people don't realize this. We have a lot of listeners who are prospective EV buyers or EV curious. Well, what the cars do is they heat themselves. The batteries heat themselves so that they are functioning. In my case, my battery heater comes on when the temperature of the battery pack hits minus 18, and it turns off. It cycles on and off. Once it gets up to minus 12, it'll cycle off. So I used about 15% of my battery, and my battery is about a fifth of the size as yours, if you consider the battery degradation in my battery pack. So it's about a fifth of the size of yours, and yours is on the low end of a Tesla, right? Yours is about 400 kilometers, but they do have 500 plus versions of Teslas out there. So my advice is electric cars work wonderful in the cold, but you got to have the battery pack for it. You have to have a bigger battery pack because they are going to give you twice or half the range. And I've got some stories here that we're going to get to from the YouTube groups that I want to get to from Saskatchewan to tell you what things are going. But last night I got contacted by one of our listeners, John, and he was having trouble with his Leaf because he had his Nissan Leaf, I think it's a 2016-17 Leaf, first generation, parked outside for 3 days and didn't start it. And sure enough, all electric cars have a 12-volt battery, and they're very susceptible to things if they're not used. I mean, it's kind of like that in a combustion vehicle. You have to keep using them to charge them up in cold weather, especially if they're not new. Well, anyway, he had some problems, and we're going to see what he's going to do and talk about that next week, because I don't think that his battery heated when the 12 volt went down. He had some problems with that, so that's unfortunate. But I would recommend anybody with an electric car to keep checking your 12 volt battery all the time, every fall. Like put a multimeter on it and see how many volts it has, just to make sure it's in good condition, or take it to a shop, a battery store, something like that.
Yeah, so you and I both used to live in Toronto, and I remember one year, this was like, 15, 16, 17 years ago in Toronto, there was a big cold snap where it, finally got below minus 20, which is not normal for Toronto. It's more of a minus 5, minus 10 kind of a place. It's right by Lake Ontario, so that kind of moderates the weather. But yeah, there was this one cold snap one year, and it seemed like half the cars in the city wouldn't start. Like it suddenly went below minus 20. And those 12-volt batteries, as long as it's warm out, you can kind of get by with, one that's not particularly new or doesn't, work particularly well. So there'd been 5 or 6 years of very mild winters. So everybody, was using these batteries that were maybe due for replacement. But, nobody found out about it until that one night when it went below minus 20.
Right.
And suddenly thousands of cars across the city wouldn't start.
That's the same thing with minus 40. Here, the furnaces that have problems show up and the cars that have problems show up. Anyway, I drove my daughter to school the other day, and we drove by my neighbor, which is about 4 doors down. He was at a pickup truck with another pickup truck boosting his pickup truck, and he couldn't get it going. And I felt bad for him. And I also tried to take a picture, and it didn't work because it was too cold for my GoPro to work, so I didn't have any video from that day. I drove my daughter to school, and you drive by everyone else getting a boost and catching cabs, and then the consensus is that electric cars don't work in winter, and you're driving by all these people where you could say combustion cars don't work in winter. That would be a more accurate statement. And yet, I know it's hard to believe, people. I know it's hard to believe, but you have to understand that electric cars take care of themselves when they're working properly. They will heat their own battery pack. And it varies how long they will do that, but they're made. I mean, they have to do better. I think Tesla has to do better with cold weather, don't you?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I've said before that it really feels like a designed in California kind of car when it gets to these temperatures. Like, we have some difficulty keeping the windows defrosted. Like, you like to leave it on auto climate, but then we find out like the side windows tend to get frosted over, so then we got to go into manual. So, it's issues they don't have to worry about in California.
The Leaf does a great job of heating up. I'm actually really impressed with it. If you take it out of eco mode, it will heat up really great. And before we lose the video for our YouTube channel, I want to show you my COVID hair. This is my COVID hair. So there it is.
Wow.
That's pretty impressive, isn't it? I don't know. I'm thinking of getting my daughter to cut it. I'm thinking of just shaving it off. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I have some home hair cutting.
I need a Flowbee, Brian.
No, these electric clippers I bought at Consumers Distributing in Toronto in the early 90s, and I still have them and I still work. My partner cuts my hair. I haven't been to a professional, hair cutter in about a year, but it doesn't look too bad.
Oh, well, nobody's going to see you. You know what? There's some Model Ys that came to Saskatchewan from Tesla, and they have a defective heater sensor on them, so they're not heating at all. So these poor buggers have to drive their car 2 hours in minus 40 or minus 30 without any heat. That's what they're expected to do, which is impossible. You'll get frostbite and die. So it's tragic, and that's not about electric cars. It's just about Tesla having a defect and shipping the cars like that. And they did say that Tesla has been better than anybody else they've ever talked to as far as mechanics, service, and carrying and doing everything they can. Brian, I just want to read you some quick comments about Facebook, and there's some other people here complaining. When the owner's manual states 136 kilometers per charge in a 2014 Smart EV, guess how much I'm getting driving 90 kilometers an hour minus 33, 60 kilometers without the heater. Now that people have stated that is kind of typical based on the battery size, but without the heater part kind of concerns me. So Smart EV, no good for Canada. Wipe that off your list if it's on your list. I was going to make a list of cars. So it's unfortunate. And this is a case of somebody probably not realizing that you do lose range in winter. And if it says X number of range, that's not what you're getting in winter. So that's the main part you need to know when you buy an electric car in Canada.
Yeah, and I'll just plug that website again that we've mentioned before, ev-database.org, which is the place to go for slightly more accurate range readings on EVs, because they give you a cold weather figure and a warm one and highway and city. That's a super useful website.
Okay, another guy here, Jim Barnsley, says, yes, size matters. My all-electric Chevrolet Bolt with 60 kilowatt battery. That's about 3 times the size of mine. Provides 200 kilometers range at minus 40 and almost 400 in the summer. So that's what you're getting in the summer. No starting worries at any temperature. Instant heat too. Now, Paul says our i3 gets 80 kilometers under those circumstances, but he says, LOL, no worries. He's enjoying his car. If you're buying a car just as a city car like I am, and you live in a small city like I do, it's a no-brainer. But if you want a car to be your main car, travel on the highway, do these long commutes, which some people buy electric cars for to save money, you need a big battery. And if you have it, you'll be laughing. You'll never look back. Another person with a Tesla lost 30 kilometers of range overnight with my baby parked outside. I've had enough with this winter garbage, he says. Summer. Fortunately, it's not always cold. We actually had a pretty warm winter. Now, Brian, if you'll indulge me, I'm going to read some comments about what people like about their electric cars in Saskatchewan, Canada. Never have to worry about cold dead battery, frozen engine, or frozen fuel. It just turns on, and pre-warming from inside the house where it is warm. David Patterson. Another one says, when I go out, my car is always warm because I leave the heat on without the car running. No nicer feeling than getting into a warm car when it's minus 35, says Curtis Bloom. I can agree with that. My car is toaster hot, and it's just, wow, it's such a refuge from the cold. I can run the car and heat it up in the garage without getting carbon monoxide poisoning, says Ryan. That's one thing that he likes about electric cars. And I don't have a garage. We both have garage envy. Jessica Wolf says, I don't have to freeze my A off pumping gas at minus 40. I also enjoy that, Brian. I never go to a gas station. Jen Tenford says, even on the coldest, most miserable morning, seeing the kids walking to school, getting all excited, yelling out, Tesla! And my son in high school points out that Tesla is a very cool car in his high school. So that's good. Young people, you are the future. God love you. Is enough to warm my heart, all that happening. He says, if you want to get the fart sound going on the external speaker ready as well, and the kids love that, I can imagine. Matt Molson says, preheating from the phone, no gas or diesel smell stinking up the neighborhood, and no clouds of vapor when cruising around town. When I drove my kid to school, Brian, the other day, the vapor cloud from the truck in front of me was so dense that it was a whiteout condition. I actually had to hit the brakes. That's how bad it was. That's just one car.
I noticed that this morning. Yeah, I did some driving around this morning, minus 30, and it was kind of amazing how much, vapor, smoke, exhaust was coming off all the cars. It was crazy.
Especially from the get-go. If you, like a light turns green, it's just whiteout conditions, and it's amazing. Now she says, I love the fact that you can warm up the car without idling, which is awesome if you park in the garage. Also, I have really enjoyed the last 3 winters not having to worry about all the regular issues of cars. And Matthew, Demyen says, I love that I never have to worry about the car starting from a dead battery or needing to run outside throughout the day. My wife's co-workers, they don't have a plug at their work and they have to go out at lunchtime in the minus 40, or they have to go with their little remote units and stand outside, and it's like being a smoker. It's like being a smoker owning a gas car. Anyway, that's it for our YouTube show this week. We're going to have more on our podcast if you want to listen to more comments about cold weather driving, and we'll see you again. By the way, everyone, you should know that the lightning round is coming up very soon. And that is when I throw headline after headline. We clean up the extra headlines, Brian, and throw them right at you. Just so we cover everything we can. So what do you want to talk about this week?
Well, there's a new premier in Nova Scotia here in Canada who's going pro-EV. There's been a proposed U.S. federal tax credit for electric bicycles. It's not passed yet, but they're looking at a 30% tax credit in the U.S. for electric bicycles. That's a huge deal. Audi has released a new electric car. And I think that's about it.
Well,
and Apple and Hyundai, we talked about this last week. It was seeming like it was getting kind of confirmed that Hyundai and Apple were going to work together to make the Apple electric car. And now the talks have ended. And Apple, they've been working on this car since 2014 and still don't have a partner to make it with. So Hyundai appears to be out of the picture, and they're looking at other possible partners.
Brian, Yes, so that's an update to something we've said before. I have another update to something. I want to update and correct something about passenger electric planes in Canada that I made a misassumption on, and we have some updated information because they're in the news again, so we'll get to that a bit later. And, there's an emerging global consensus that the time has come to transition to big petroleum, to a post-petroleum future. I think that is the message of what has changed in the last year for us since we started a year ago, 51 episodes later, is that there is that global consensus. We're ready now, and investment and just the political will from people and some governments and some politicians is getting that. So I'm looking forward to next year.
Like the whole COVID pandemic has maybe just accelerated things. I think we were heading in this direction anyway, but the pandemic has given us all more time to ponder our existence, I guess. And lots of things have been accelerated, and the clean energy movement seems to be one of them.
Brian, it's time for our brand new segment. What do you think?
What do you think?
I'm so happy to have a new segment. Whenever we come up with a new segment on the show that has traction, it's always an exciting. I feel like I'm a parent birthing something. It's a big deal. So, Brian, when the segment "What do you think" is, I ask you, what do you think about these things? So stand by, Brian. The $25,000 Tesla might be here sooner than expected. Tesla has noted that the car will be designed by locally hired designers in China. This will allow the EV maker to create an affordable car that caters to the specific needs of the Chinese market. But with this in mind, the upcoming vehicle will likely be positioned for the working class. Hey, no, I'm not in the working class. And offer other modest power, maybe 350 to 450 kilometers of range, which is interesting if they do that. It might be less, though. Combined with its price and Tesla's trademark tech and safety, such a vehicle would probably sell very well. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's going to be very exciting. I think that, it sounds like they have made quite a bit of progress in this direction. Of course, Tesla's expanding in many, many ways with many different models. So this is going to be a big year for them. If they can get maybe the pickup truck out by the end of the year, get the semi out by the end of the year. They're juggling a lot of balls in the air, and it remains to be seen how many of them and how quickly they can execute on all these things. But the rumor is that they're well into this project now in China. And of course, they can build it in China and ship it to the whole world, which, makes a lot of sense, should be economical for them.
Brian, they just say the design-wise, the media outlet that reported this as the $25,000 Tesla will be positioned as a compact hatchback built on the Model 3 platform. Can they make a $25,000 car on the Model 3 platform? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I don't see why not. It would probably be the updated architecture, meaning once they move the Model 3 to the integrated battery pack with the new 4680 battery cells that they talked about at Battery Day. So it makes sense to build more than one car on the same platform, which is kind of the Model 3 and the Model Y already. So, absolutely. They should be able to make a smaller car on that same platform, I would think.
Will it have as much tech, though? Because there's a lot of the tech is expensive. And, that's a lot of car. People envisioned a very small, like a GM, not a smart car, but like a Spark, a Chevrolet Spark, like one of those tiny subcompact cars. The Model 3 is actually pretty big. The platform is pretty big, especially when you factor in the hatchback. It'd be as big as my Leaf, I'm sure.
Yeah, that was the one thing I was a little bit surprised by that because it needs to be a much smaller car. So, is the Model 3 platform too big? I'm not sure, but I guess we'll see.
All right. Saskatchewan Model Y owners are left without heaters in -30 due to a known faulty sensor issue, and they've been asked by Tesla to drive for hours to get service. We're lucky we actually have a service center in Saskatchewan now, which just opened a couple weeks ago in Saskatoon, but it's hours and hours of drive for some people who don't live there. What do you think about that? Is Tesla at fault for putting out cars with faulty sensors to Canada and then having the heaters not go on, or is it just rushing things too much?
Oh, yeah, they're always rushing things a bit, but and I may have told this story before, but we used to have a Nissan Cube gas-powered car, and we would have this problem in the winter where, we would drive it for 5 minutes when it was real cold out. And if the car didn't fully warm up, we'd park it for 10 minutes and then we would try to start it and it wouldn't start. Like nothing would happen. You'd press the start button. And when we eventually took it to Nissan, they said something kind of similar. It was a sensor issue.
Right.
And getting back to your thing about the Nissan Leaf temperature gauge not going below minus 30, the story they told me at the dealership was that they spoke to someone in Japan and told them about these temperatures that we were having and the issue, and they were confused because I'm not sure I really believe that. I mean, obviously they know they export cars all over the world and they must know that climates are different in different places, but that would appear to have been the problem, is that the sensor in the car just wasn't equipped or programmed, because it's probably related to the car computer as well, that it just wasn't programmed to deal with temperatures that low.
I think I want to be clear that I think that electric cars are going to be awesome in winter, and Canadians will like them once they mature. But I do think they need to mature a bit. I mean, Tesla just added a heating steering wheel now to their cars just now, and that is something, especially an electric car when you don't want to use as much heat if you can help it. It's very important. Nissan got that right with the Leaf. But, and I also think that the Nissan battery pack is better insulated than the Teslas. I noticed you can buy an add-on insulation. So maybe there's like a cold weather pack that Tesla could add on. It was optional for like the first 6 months of the Leaf, and then they made it standard across the board, which was the right thing to do, and which allows me to import the car from the States and not worry about it. I just think there could be a cold weather package where these things are addressed. But I mean, Canada is a small market. I mean, how many people are stupid enough to live on the prairies of Canada and the temperatures that we endure? So, maybe they're not going to change the car that drastically. But if you have charging at home, especially if you have level 2 charging, which is 240 volts or 220 or whatever it is, 40 amps or so, 30 amps or so, you can have a good experience with electric car if your battery's big enough. You will be watching your neighbor get boosts and be laughing that it's heating up via your app.
Yeah, there was another story I saw on Facebook or YouTube or something. Somebody in Saskatchewan boosted a gas car with their Mitsubishi i-MiEV, which is one of the smallest and weakest and wimpiest electric cars that you could ever possibly buy. And
I could park it in my shed.
Boost it. Yeah, they had tried to boost it with another gas car or truck or something, and lo and behold, the little Mitsubishi i-MiEV was able to boost the other car.
There's a few stories going around of people with electric cars rescuing people with ice cars, like their daughters or relatives, and co-workers. It's hilarious. I don't know how long it's going to take for people to get the message that electric cars work in winter. I don't know. I know it's complex, and I keep running into people every day and trying to explain it to them, but yeah, I mean, I had questions too when I was about to buy a car, so we'll see about that. So, Brian, what do you think about Elon Musk announces that he's writing a book about Tesla?
Oh, I didn't hear that. That's news to me.
It was a tweet. You missed the tweet.
Yeah, well, that would be probably pretty fascinating. It's, I was thinking the other day, so Elon Musk is known for having like a cameo in one of the Iron Man movies, like Iron Man 2, maybe, I'm not sure. But that was so long ago. He had accomplished almost nothing when he was in that movie compared to what he's accomplished since then. Like, he had a rocket company back then.
Yeah.
He had an electric car company back then, but they were really kind of nothing compared to what they are today. So, I bet there's a crazy number of fascinating stories about how this is all gone.
And he was known to be rich because he had sold PayPal, but then he'd also put all of his money into Tesla and SpaceX, and now he's a lot more rich, just like you. You're a lot more rich too, thanks to Elon.
Yeah, Elon Musk is now worth more than, just personally, worth more than ExxonMobil.
Yeah, and like that's going to change. The disparity between those two is going to broaden as we go along here. Another Elon Musk thing. What do you think about, Brian? What do you think about Elon Musk putting up $100 million towards carbon capture through X Prize? And I think this is the kind of carbon capture, not on a coal plant, but like just taking it out of the air to fix the planet.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if they've maybe specified, but that's what I was assuming when I read the story, that, you can still draw carbon just directly out of the air and capture it or sequester it. So I'm, assuming that's what the competition is. And this could be a way to dig ourselves out of the hole that we've gotten into, if there's a way to just build up capacity and just start drawing this stuff back out of the air so we don't all kill ourselves.
And Brian, what do you think about Starlink, the home internet service from SpaceX, now being available to everyone?
Yeah, and I've considered maybe buying it for like our cottage property. I went through a little bit of the ordering process. The thing I would like to do is just activate it for 6 months out of the year because it's a seasonal property. But I wasn't able to determine from the website if that's a possibility, if we'd be able to turn it off and turn it on and only use it half the year, because I'd be paying for an awful lot of internet that I wasn't using if I, paid for it and used it all year round.
That's for sure.
But I'm tempted. It's very interesting, and Elon Musk has said there's maybe an IPO coming for Starlink. Like, this is a potentially gigantic business.
You know what we should do? We should find some community that doesn't have any internet service, any high-speed internet service. Go up there, rent a house, set up a bunch of Starlinks, and charge people for it. Start our own business, recharge them. Maybe you can't resell it. I don't know, but it's going to make a big difference. I mean, if your cottage, you have an option for high-speed internet. A lot of people don't, though, and especially in other parts of the world. But in remote parts of where we live too, it's a big deal, and it means so much to the communities to get education and even medical service and God knows what all.
Yeah, there was a fantastic story on one of the SpaceX launches a couple of weeks ago about a First Nations community in Northern Ontario, and they were one of the first in Canada to get the Starlink. And it was an amazing story, really heartwarming, because this is a very remote community that, had very limited internet, and then suddenly, they can do proper education. Like, kids could then take distance learning from other universities and other places. It's amazing what this can open up.
All right, this concludes What Do You Think?
What do you think?
Love it. Love my new segments.
Yeah, so let's get back to the e-bike tax credit. So this has been proposed but not yet approved in the U.S., a 30% federal tax credit for electric bicycle purchases. This is something I would love to see in Canada because, as you know, I've been shopping for an electric bike for a long time and just not quite ready to pull the trigger because the price always seems to be a little bit too high. I don't quite want to spend that much, but if we had something like a 30% tax credit, I would be all in immediately.
By the way, I saw this bike that Walmart sells, and it's known for being cheap at $798 in Canada, Canadian. It was on clearance for $598 for a day, and then they got more in of the updated model, which has the same specs. I don't know how that worked out, but people love it too. The reviews are very positive because of the electrical aspect of it, but I mean, it is just a crappy Walmart bike. Brian, I wanted to correct a story because we talked about electrifying air travel, and one of the best cases that we can talk about for actual passenger transportation is in Canada, on the West Coast. In December 2019, they flew a Harbour Air, which is a company that does very short seaplane flights between Vancouver Island, where Victoria is located, in Vancouver, which is on the mainland, and to Seattle and some other places, in Whistler, which is a ski resort that doesn't have much of an airport. These are places that these short, hot flights were perfect. So they used a 60-year-old de Havilland Beaver float plane and converted it to electric because there's a company in Seattle that has done it. Now, I assumed that they had service going that passenger service had started. It has not. All they have done so far is that 3-minute test flight that we saw on the news and talked about months ago on our show, early on in our show's run. So they actually have only done that. And COVID has actually been the thing that has slowed it down. Now, the thing is, they need to get to do some more testing for the regulator, for the Aviation Transport Canada regulator. And when they do that, they'll be doing more flights and more tests, and hopefully they'll be getting flights. And plus, they're also talking already, 1 year later, about improving the battery pack, which has more density. And already a year later, they're going to improve the battery pack and have more performance out of that plane. So that's cool.
Yeah, no, that's good. I didn't know that.
The Tesla semi-production delays appear to finally be over, as the automaker is reportedly hoping to manufacture up to 2,500 units before the end of 2021. That's pretty cool news, don't you think?
Yeah, well, if you think about all the factories they're building, this is all starting to come to fruition. So the Texas factory that's almost finished and the Berlin factory that's almost finished. It's going to be a huge year for Tesla, but they're going to need so many batteries to get all of these products on the road that there's a lot of potential roadblocks or hurdles for them.
Now, initial production in 2021 will be split between the automaker's current facilities. The body of the Semi will be built at Fremont, with final assembly occurring at Giga, Nevada. The production process will move to Giga, Texas in 2022, but parts of it could remain at Giga, Nevada, the source said to a media outlet. And pilot production will reportedly begin in July, with full production beginning in August 2021. And initial production will be limited to 100 units per week in 2021. That should give about 2,500 units total by the end of the year if all goes well. And that will ramp up to 500 per week in 2022 for a total production target of 10,000 units next year. That'll be 10,000 semi-trucks getting tested, getting proven, and not polluting the air. And then by 2023 and 2024, they're looking at 25,000 units per year.
So, yeah, I mentioned this briefly. So there's a new premier in Nova Scotia, the East Coast province here in Canada. And right now in Canada, it's sort of like British Columbia and Quebec are kind of the main provinces that are supporting EVs and EV infrastructure. They've got their own incentives. And now it looks like Nova Scotia has headed down that path as well. They had a change in leadership. Same party is in charge, but a new premier. And he was elected on a platform of supporting EVs. So it's looking like there's going to be EV incentives and charging incentives in Nova Scotia. So this is spreading throughout Canada.
I wish it would come here. It's not going to come here.
No time soon.
Unless there's something federal that gets put on for, they expand their federal rebate of $5,000. Or, and by the way, the Model Y, apparently the Standard Range Plus has showed up in Vancouver and they're not getting the incentive in Canada. What do you think about that?
Yeah, there was a delay in delivering the standard range Model Ys, and the speculation was they were waiting for the federal rebate to kick in, but they started delivering the cars. The rebate was not included, so no one's really sure what's happening with that, but it doesn't look great for the incentive to be on the Model Y here in Canada.
Just because the base model is too expensive and doesn't meet the cutoff, unless they could change things up, but I mean, the priority is now on COVID and things like that. Brian, I still continue to be surprised at, because I saw a piece today on CBC's website about how surprising it is that General Motors has decided to not make ICE vehicles after 2035. Now, you and me as an EV owner, we understand how that they're superior to gas cars, even as they are, and they're only going to get cheaper and better and longer range, and any issues that you have with EVs will be long eliminated by 2035, and no one in their right mind is going to want to buy a car by 2035, especially as they'll be banned in a lot of parts of the world, so it's not going to be profitable to even make a new, they're not going to update and make it and put any research into new engines, and and just the battery breakthroughs and the increase in density, it's going to be incredible by then.
Yeah, for sure. 2035 is way too late. I mean, no one's going to want them in 2030 or 2025.
Now, the article said that this was a bigger deal than Keystone. And I'm just laughing at that. It's not a bigger deal. It's not going to kill the... If you didn't know that, where have you been? You have not been listening to our show. And I do have my blood pressure monitor here. It's very close by if I need to get to it. But you have not been listening to our show, and you need to know what's going on in the world. Tell your friends, everyone. I want to thank everyone who actually rated us on Apple iTunes. I appreciate that. There was several people who did that, took the time to do that. We really appreciate it. Something podcasters have to ask for. It's just the way the podcast world works. So if you go see us on iTunes, The Clean Energy Show, and give us a rating, a review would be even cool. I don't even care what you say about my hair or anything else, or that apparent vehicular manslaughter thing against Brian that we heard about earlier. You can comment on that.
Yeah, so Audi has announced the e-tron GT. This is their luxury flagship EV. This is maybe similar to the Porsche Taycan, and it's up in a similar price to the Porsche Taycan or to the maybe Tesla Model S Plaid edition. So this is an expensive luxury car, and I know you don't enjoy talking about expensive luxury cars because, that's not for you. I don't want to say why that's not for you, but that's not for you.
I own very little Tesla stock, zero, in fact.
Anyway, yeah, just another, new vehicle announcement. There's something announced almost every day, and this is the latest.
I will say this, Brian. The local Audi dealers said that it is coming late summer to Regina and early fall. So, and they seem excited about it. So, yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Oh, and I've lost the tab for it, but there was a Hyundai Genesis electric prototype spotted in Canada. Really? Genesis is the luxury brand of Hyundai, and they only have a couple of different models, and they said that there is an EV Genesis coming, and it was spotted in Canada, charging at a charger. There was a story on, I think, autotrader.ca that I've lost it at the very moment, but that's kind of a big deal that there's an electric Genesis, and this is a larger, not as expensive probably as the Audi, but a larger kind of luxury sedan. And the Genesis brand has been getting lots of good reviews. People like the car. It's Hyundai going in a slightly different direction because it's the kind of car that you can buy on the internet, and in some cities they will deliver it to your house rather than having a dealership network and all that kind of stuff. So it's one of the ways that Hyundai's preparing for the EV revolution.
During COVID, this is the most talking I do every week. If it wasn't for this, I would completely go antisocial. I would come out of the pandemic not being able to carry a conversation. Thank God for this podcast. That's all I'm saying. I want to switch it over to wind because Denmark is doing something I found kind of weird and never thought or heard of. They're actually making a wind island. So this is kind of like a little island in the middle of wind turbines to put batteries and transformers and infrastructure for wind. So they're calling it an energy hub and will function as an offshore power plant, gathering and distributing green electricity from hundreds of wind turbines surrounding the island and transporting the power to consumers in countries surrounding the North Sea. The island is expected to have a total area of at least 120,000 square meters. I can't really picture that. I'm thinking like a city block, maybe, something like that. The first phase will be able to provide 3 million European households with green energy. That is one project. So that's pretty cool, Brian.
That's great. I always love that kind of outside the box thinking. And sure, why not turn an island into a power plant? It's a whole new world out there.
So we'll see how that goes, and it should be interesting. Do you have anything else before we get to the lightning round?
No, let's go.
The Clean Energy Show Lightning Round.
Woo! Always like the lightning round. It's a fan favorite. More than 8 million people, Brian, have died in 2018 from fossil fuel pollution. Double the number previously thought. They've studied this further, and can you believe that many people are dying, and yet people around here say fossil, fossil, fossil?
I mean, I can believe it, although this is one of those things that is probably very difficult to quantify. Like at one time they had a specific number in mind, and now that number has doubled. So, which number was correct? I mean, presumably the new number is correct. But, people die for all sorts of reasons, and it's difficult sometimes to make a direct correlation to fossil fuels. But obviously, lots of stuff is getting burnt. Pollutants are getting out into the atmosphere. We're breathing those in. And, clearly that has an effect beyond, climate change and all that kind of stuff. Even if you think climate change is not real, we got to stop breathing in all these pollutants.
That is correct, sir. And I do think that once buses get off the road, I'm looking forward to school buses. Not polluting kids. My kids won't experience that, unfortunately, but they get that diesel exhaust, which is terrible inside and outside. So it's even worse and more disgusting and everything you can imagine.
Yeah, and there was a video on YouTube this week on the Fully Charged channel that about a city in China that has 16,000 electric buses and 22,000 electric taxis. I forget the name of the city. But that's a really interesting YouTube video. If people are interested, look for the Fully Charged Show channel on YouTube. And they've got a very high-tech, it's not just the fact that there's electric buses, but they've got this high-tech hub for keeping track of them all and keeping track of the charging. And it was absolutely fascinating. I really enjoyed it. Yeah,
it's just amazing what you can do. And sometimes, they have to bring extra power from the power company to charge up a whole bunch of city buses, but it can be done, and it's worthwhile after a while, don't you think?
Yeah, for sure. And you hear some things too. There was another story I saw somewhere about a place that had gone to electric garbage trucks. And, they interviewed the drivers, and the drivers were like, oh, this is so much more calm of a job because they just don't have that grinding noise of the diesel engine all day. Like, it just improved the job by switching to electric. Just imagine that. Like, you've got a big, noisy diesel engine that's pumping out lots of noise and smoke, and then going to something clean and quiet. It improves the working conditions for people.
All right, we'll be right back with some more lightning rounds.
The Clean Energy Show wants to hear from you. Contact us on Twitter, Clean Energy Pod, by email, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com, by voicemail, speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Brian, Rivian and Lucid Motors are both expanding in the U.S. retail space. Did you hear that? And what do you think about it? Because, we're used to Tesla stores. Now we're going to have Rivian stores and Lucid stores, all electric stores coming soon.
Yeah, I didn't really read the details, but are they partnering with somebody, or are these standalone stores, or what is it?
They're standalone stores to start with, and then they will be possibly partnering at various places, possibly malls are one possibility. Going into malls and just having, I know Tesla still does that, don't they? I was in Phoenix and they had a mall store where you just, you're shopping for a pair of boots and then, you go shop for a car. And
lots of other companies have done that too. Like Hyundai Hyundai does that around here. I've been to malls here in our city where they'll just rent out a space for a few months and park a few cars and try and get some customers.
And sometimes you can do it right in the middle of the mall, right?
Yeah. That too. But it's a whole new era. All this stuff has to be reinvented. So, we don't have to stick to a traditional, brick and mortar building if that's what you need. Tesla does a lot of mobile service. Yeah. They do have service centers, but then they have other customers that are dealt with by, somebody in a van. So it's a whole new world. Let's do something different.
Well, I'm hoping people will get a chance for test drives because that's important, especially with a new technology like this. You're not just feeling about, how's the suspension, how's the feel, how's it feel in my butt. You want to know how an electric car works, and that will impress people also when they see how it works.
No, absolutely. And we now have a service center in Saskatoon nearby us. I would definitely have gone for a test drive if that was an option when I bought mine. Most people don't buy a car on the internet without ever having driven one. I was sort of unusual that way. But, as it expands, as more EVs get out there, the more people get rides and, people start to understand it. And as you said, you have a hard time explaining to me, other people, the cold weather issue. I don't know, it's just going to take a while for this kind of stuff to sink in and to people to change their thinking around because we've just been, working with gas cars for the last 100 years. That change doesn't come easily or quickly.
I think what's going to happen is much of the rest of the world is going to come up with a 2030 or 2035 ban or even 2025 as in Norway. And when they do that, they're going to stop making combustion vehicles because it's not going to be profitable. Here's another prediction I put on the Twitter, and I want to mention it, and that is that I think that once we get to about 30% of sales in North America of electric cars, and it may not take off after that, it might take off after that, we're not sure. Once it's there for a little while, maybe a couple of years, then I think we're going to start seeing gas stations disappear, because many gas stations barely get by now. They're selling stuff. So they, and people don't need electric chargers in the city so much. They need it more on the highways and in small towns along routes. So I think that we are actually going to see at some point by the end of this decade a decrease in gas stations, and it's actually going to be easier to charge your EV than to gas your ICE in a city.
Yeah, and my understanding was always that, gas stations were always a low-margin business. Like, they really have never, I don't think, made a lot of profit. And there's lots of them around, so there's competition that keeps the price at a kind of a specific spot. So, absolutely. And we will need less gas stations, so of course some will disappear.
Brian, renewables will be the leading source of U.S. electricity by 2030. That's including nuclear and hydro, of course, but the leading source of electricity by 2030. Encouraging or not? That's
good. I would have thought it might be sooner than that, but okay.
It may. I mean, a lot of these predictions now, even from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, are very conservative, and they keep having to update them. So, So Kia accelerates electric transition plan with 11 model EV lineup and 7 dedicated EVs by 2026. Good or fluff?
That's all right. There's so many of these announcements coming out now that I've started to, I look at them and my eyes kind of glaze over and I drift off. And so I'm maybe not paying as much attention. Lots of announcements. It's kind of like I'm adjusting my thinking to really just worry about them when they actually come out. Like, that's when we need to be concerned, because, who knows how realistic any of these timelines are, or if any of these companies might be bankrupt before any of these plans come to fruition.
So noted investor Gary Black unloaded his Tesla shares on February 8th after stating undefined 2021 delivery guidance and risky capital allocation, and other reasons convinced him to let go of his holdings. I know you're long-term Tesla, but are you a little worried that we might see a dip?
Not so much. And I think maybe the Bitcoin thing was another part of that. So, of course, Tesla this past week, they purchased $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin just as a way to store some of their cash. They have lots of cash in the bank. So I think that was one of his reasons for dumping it. And you could kind of understand, like, any investors have made like 700% return just in the last year. So some people are going to maybe unload. But we were talking earlier about everything they've got coming online. I'm sort of expecting it maybe to kind of stay static for a little while. That would be my guess. But we've got the Cybertruck coming out, the Semi coming out, Model Y production in Berlin. Like, all of this stuff is happening. Like, when you think about everything that's going to happen in the next 2 years, including possibly full self-driving, like, it's just an insane amount, as well as their stated goal of just simply growing by 50% per year. So right now, the Tesla revenue is around $31 billion, I think. That was their revenue in 2020. So, imagine growing that by 50%. So next year, that's $45 billion. The year after that, that's like $70, $80 billion. That 50% every year, if they can actually execute that, it's the figures in just a few years are kind of staggering.
Bloomberg, speaking of the devil, says 4.4 million passenger EVs will be sold globally this year. I remember not long ago, there was 1 million. And I think that was 2 years ago. So things are moving, and they're moving fast, Brian.
It's what we call the S curve of adoption for technology, and we're still kind of at the bottom of the S, but in an S curve adoption, at some point it starts to go almost vertical. So we're still in those early stages, but it's really going to start taking off soon.
$4 billion is what a U.S. oil company put into perovskite. I keep wanting to say it different. Perovskite solar cells of the future. Oil company is getting in on board, and $4 million is nothing to sneeze at.
No, and there was another story about, I think it was BP that won some big offshore wind contract in the UK. I don't have that story in front of me. So, the oil companies that know what they're doing are trying to stave off their demise by getting into some of this stuff. It makes total sense.
So Green Car Reports, we got to keep moving here. Because of EV adoption, Norway leads the world in per capita electricity use. Not surprising, I guess.
No, and I've definitely been using a lot of electricity, especially in this cold weather that we were talking about. So I'm charging my car every night. And it's funny because I don't really need to go anywhere because it's a pandemic. But, you go to pick up groceries, I go to my mother's house. I'm driving a lot more than I thought I would in this pandemic. And I'm using, maybe 10, 20 kilowatt hours a day. So on a lot of days, I'm actually doubling the electricity use in our house. It's still way cheaper than buying gasoline for a car. But also, too, I think I'm driving more because, if I only had gasoline cars, I would probably drive a little bit less because it's just sort of more wasteful.
And finally this week, Markham Hislop, who has a podcast and YouTube show. He's an Alberta energy journalist, and I guess he doesn't necessarily live in Alberta right now. He was working in Saskatchewan for a while. He points out that Alberta's, and this is the oil capital of Canada and the oil sands capital, he's saying that the Conservative government rhetoric there is that the only reason that the energy transition is happening the way it is because crazy left-wing groups are coercing politicians and telling them that something is this way and that, and the politicians are buckling to that pressure, like Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden. And if they could just get rid of those crazy left-wing groups to stop doing that, then the policy would change. But what they don't realize, that Markham points out, is that it's economics policy got the ball rolling 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Now the ball is rolling on its own, and it's going downhill thanks to the economics of it's unstoppable, and it does nothing. They just don't get that, and that is scary for you and I who live somewhere, and the politicians don't get that, and they're very, very, very careful about, I can't even say something bad about oil or I'll get put in jail in this province practically. I mean, come on.
Yeah, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I was actually kind of disappointed that Biden canceled the Keystone XL. Like, it's obviously the right move for economics and for the environment, but then it just means that they have somebody to blame. So if the Alberta economy tanks, they can blame Biden and say it's his fault that we didn't build this pipeline. But of course, it's irrelevant. As we've said before, there was policies to try and save the coal industry in the U.S., but it's just too expensive to burn coal. Like, when you can get free power from the sun and from wind, burning coal doesn't make economic sense.
That's it, Brian. Our first year is done. Congratulations. Happy birthday to you. Enjoy your cake later. It's been another pleasure to talk to you about clean energy and transportation, and look forward to doing it again next Wednesday. So we'll see everyone again next week.
Yeah, see you next week.